Good afternoon, everyone. We should be getting started in a few minutes' time. At 2 exactly, we will be starting. So we're just waiting for a few more people to join us, and also for the presenter to join us. But we should be getting started very soon. Afternoon, Prof.
Hey,
Afternoon, everyone.
Simbareshi. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you, Prof?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank
Good.
you very much. Yeah, I know we should get more people joining us. I'm
Okay.
sure at 2 exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
If it's anything like at Rhodes, uh, people will arrive at 3 minutes past two or 5 minutes past two. It's like we suddenly realize, oh my word, we're meant to be online.
yeah, yeah.
Listen,
Okay.
Simba, I can't share. It says only presenters can share. Can you make me a presenter?
Yes. Let me work on that, Prof.
Okay,
So that
great.
to share. I think it's an issue of settings. Let me work on that. Yeah, Prof. Can you check for me if you are now able to present? I've changed the settings. I'm sure you should be able to present now. Yes. We can see your slide.
Perfect. Should I just leave it on?
Yes. I think you can leave it on, Prof.
Okay.
Then I should be introducing you shortly, so that we get started at 2 exactly. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure we should have more people joining us as we go. So we have the pleasure of having Professor McKenna, who is going to be our speaker today, presenting on a very interesting topic on artificial intelligence in higher education. So let me quickly introduce Prof. So Professor Sue McKenna is a professor of higher education research at Rhodes University. She runs several international research projects focused on higher education as a common good in the age of neoliberalism. She works with universities across Africa, Europe, and the US to understand the university's role in addressing social injustices and contributing to democratic voices. She's also an NRIF rated researcher, an Academy of Science South Africa member, and publishes widely in both the public media as well as in academic books and journals. So we are quite honored to have you, Prof, to present and share your insights with us on a very important and timely topic on artificial intelligence in higher education. So let me take this opportunity to welcome Prof. McKenna and hand over the opportunity to get us started. So, Prof, I hand over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Simbarasha and I met at let me turn on my camera very briefly just so that you can see me. I like to joke that I want to show you that I'm real, that I'm not a robot. You can see that I'm actually sitting at home at the moment because there's renovations being done in our office block, and so it's a bit noisy. And I turn on my camera to show you that I'm real, but of course nowadays with deep fakes and AI generated videos, just seeing my face on your screen doesn't mean that I'm real. So you will just have to take it on trust that I am real and I am here. And I was just saying that I met Simbarasha at the Cadastria conference earlier this year. And since then, we've been on done a seminar together, and we're busy working on a publication together. So it's really nice to connect in this way. And it's SPU is one of the few universities I've actually never been to. There are only two universities in South Africa that I've never been to, and SPU is one of them. So I really need to make this more than virtual at some stage in the future. So yeah, I've been asked to just talk about my understanding of AI and the relationship between AI and higher education. And so I'm going to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then I'm hoping that that will allow, that there'll be some time at the end for questions, because what I'm going to talk to you about today is a position that I take. It's a view I hold very strongly, but I'm very aware that others have quite different views from me on these issues. So yeah, let's get started. So these are the four things that I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about algorithmic bias. I want to talk about knowledge bias. I want to talk about the digital divide, and then I want to talk about critical AI literacy. Now, in my previous many talks on this topic, I've focused on the critical AI literacy first, because that's the immediate concern of most academics. What are we going to do about students using AI? Should we be using AI? Though these are very valid and important questions, but as I have argued in various places, and in particular in a piece in Higher Education Research and Development Journal with my colleague Neil Cram, I've argued that if we only talk about students using AI, the worries about AI, we might miss out on another aspect of our role in relation to AI, which is really about the idea that we are meant to be nurturing critical citizens for the world. That's what it says in the white paper of 1997. It says that 2 of the 4 purposes of a post-apartheid higher education are to nurture critical citizens. In other words, people who go out into the world and ask questions. They don't take things at face value. They always challenge anything that they see to ask, well, whose interests might this be? Whose interests might this be against? How is this validated? How real is this? How truthful is this? So that's part of our job description, is nurturing these critical citizens. And so when we look at AI, that's part of our job, is to nurture them to engage as critical citizens in the world who can speak up for the vulnerable, who can use AI in ethical ways, who can challenge industries that use AI in unethical ways. And the other thing that it says in the white paper of 1997 in terms of our job description is that we are meant to be not only nurturing critical citizens, but we are meant to be a public good. So it's meant to be good for society as a whole to have universities within it. So the fact of the university's existence should be good for all people, even those who never, ever, ever step foot on a campus. It should be good for the environment for us to have universities. So our responsibility goes beyond credentialing students and teaching them what they need to write in their exams so that they can get the piece of paper that will get them a better job. It has to go far beyond that. And I think that when we talk about AI, we need to frame it in those bigger ways in terms of, what is, in terms of those bigger issues of what is our role in nurturing the critical literacies. So I normally start with that, but today I want to flip the script a little bit and actually start by talking about what are these bigger critical literacy issues that our students need to understand before I move on to what does it mean for our teaching and learning. Because, as I say, we have a bigger role to play than just worrying about whether or not our students use AI. We have a much bigger responsibility. So I'm going to start off with this whole issue of algorithmic bias, knowledge bias, and digital divide. But I will come back to the implications of teaching and learning before the end. So first of all, let's just think about this reality that if a student in Kimberley asks some kind of AI assistant, let me move that out the way, about the term leadership, they're going to get examples of white male figures. If they're using an AI image generator and they say, please, produce a picture of a leader, it's going to be a white man. If they ask the AI, can you give me some examples of strong leaders? It's, unless you specify from the global south or African, it will give you well-known white male figures. The same thing if you ask about development, national development, it will produce narratives that frame the world in very particular ways and frame their own context as underdeveloped. And I'm working with Nompilo Chuma at Stellenbosch at the moment to look at how that kind of bias plays out in the South African context, because most of the research, even on this bias nature, comes from the global north. So we need students to understand this if they are to engage with AI in critical ways. And so we need to start off by understanding how these large language models are trained. And I'm going to be focusing primarily on large language models when I talk today. So primarily something like ChatGPT or Claude or DeepSeek or Grok or one of those kind of chatbots that are language models. And if we think of these AI tools, we need to understand that it's trained primarily on data from the internet. Masses, bazillions, gazillions of bits of data, books and articles and social media tweets and every text that was available was used to train these programs. So then you need to think about, okay, these texts are enormous in quantity and very varied in many ways, but 60% of web content is written in English. 60%. 5% of the world speaks English as their home language, but 60% of the text on which these large language models were trained is in English. So it's really important to note that it's going to have a particular skewed I don't want to say view of the world because it doesn't have a view, but in identifying tokens, which is how large language models work, it identifies patterns of similarity and connects certain terms and concepts so that every time a word is produced, it then immediately produces the next most likely word, the next most likely sentence, and so on. And it does this in seconds and in an incredibly sophisticated manner. So I'm not for a moment denying how impressively human-like its output is. But let's remember that the vast majority of texts on which it has been trained to identify the next token, to identify those patterns, is from North America, Europe, and Australia. Some researchers have put it as high as 90%, that 90% of the texts on which large language models have been trained and the basis by which it now creates new text comes from just those three regions, North America, Europe, and Australia. So this is going to skew the global knowledge representation. It's going to have huge global north biases. And I think we really need to understand this, English language dominance, the geographic concentration, and the implications that has for what it is able to generate. And our students need to understand this. We've got loads of examples of how this bias plays out. I've given the example of a student in Kimberley asking about development or asking about leadership and getting very human-like, useful responses that they can use in their essay or test or whatever. But they're not necessarily going to produce something that validates the context in which our students work. But even beyond that, we know that generative AI has already allowed huge leaps forwards in terms of science. And I'm thinking particularly here in medical science, but in other fields as well. Huge things are becoming possible because we now have the ability to work through massive corpus of data in a very short space of time. But not all of the stuff that's coming out of these developments is positive. Quite a lot of it is negative. And if we don't make sure that our students are aware of the algorithmic biases, they're not going to realize the significant importance of them being critical citizens, not only challenging what they see themselves, but helping their friends and family to be aware that what it produces is not the truth, what it produces is a representation. And here's just a few examples on the screen now. I'm sure you've read about the hiring algorithms that are being used by various companies to work through, thousands of CVs and whittle it down to just a few people needing to be interviewed. But very quickly, Amazon, they found that when they asked when they got an AI tool developed for this purpose, it would always shortlist men because it was trained on a basis of data that they found, oh, okay, so men are preferred because, it looks through the historical records. So, and large language model seeks to reproduce patterns. So in this case, the pattern that it was reproducing was a gendered one. In medical AI, we've got examples, as I said, huge breakthroughs, but also some problematic ones. So we know, for example, that the dermatology AI, which is being used to identify cancerous moles and skin and things on the skin at a much quicker and much more reliable rate, but it still is much better at doing this on white skins than on any darker skins. And if you have a particularly dark skin, it just doesn't have the training data to do that. So we have real issues there. Image generation, I've already mentioned that. I'm sure all of you have played around already with Canva or Gamma or whatever. If you ask it to ask it to put say I want a picture of a nurse, it'll probably produce a white female. I want a picture of a leader. If you give it a term of some kind of authority, it will probably not 99.9% of the time, but at least 90% of the time, it will reinforce the sexist and racist patterns that are within its training data. We've seen in the US some very interesting studies where large language models generative AI is being used to identify people who are more at risk of going back into jail. And again, it very quickly it was meant to identify people based on their habits, gambling, drinking, employment, and so on. But instead, it flagged Black people as being the most likely to commit crimes and have to go back to prison. This was a particular study on recidivism. Language translation is fantastic. It's getting better all the time, which is, again, a massive breakthrough in every possible field of research. But it does get things wrong. It doesn't know how to cope with the fact that English, which is the dominant language of generative AI, is a gendered language. It's not as gendered as French, which has a bed is female, a chair is male, or whatever. Even inanimate objects have a gender in French. We don't do that in English, but we do have gendered pronouns. We say she and he. And you don't have that in many African languages, Xhosa, Zulu. You don't have those gendered terms, and it's interesting to see how it grapples with some of that stuff. That if you say if you don't give a gender and it's translating about someone who's a doctor, if it's taking a text in isiZulu, for example, about a doctor and it translates it into English, it will make the doctor male. It won't say they to the neutral pronoun. So this sort of stuff is embedded, and it also doesn't cope very well with idioms and the nuances of other languages. This is just one example, this whole development discourse, because there have been some interesting studies, and in particular, I think you have studies done by Punya Mishra looking at algorithmic bias, and he was looking at terms like development. So if you get the large language models to create texts around development, the terms like third world or underdeveloped, it will very clearly package those words in a discourse of superiority of global north, the inferiority and need of the global south. So often if it's challenged to produce a set of possible responses to intractable problems like climate change in the global south, it will often point to the need to collaborate with people in the global north, which, very possibly I'm not saying it's wrong in those responses. It's picking up those responses because of the patterns of the training material, but it certainly has, by virtue of the biases within that training material, the AI has a problematic bias of assuming that everyone is trying to become a hyper-capitalist, hyper-consumerist, crass consumption, environmental mess, of America, for example. And that is what is produced in the large language models. So there's definitely a deficit-focused perspective on non-Western systems. Now, what's important to note is that every time a large language model generates a new output from whatever prompt you've asked it to, it is creating a new text. So obviously, even if I asked the exact same text to the exact same gave the exact same prompt to the exact same large language model, I would get a different response each and every time. So you might get something that, you might have to ask variations of this in order to get a problematic response to show to your students. It's more, so I'm not suggesting that every time it's going to be like this, but it is in the training material. So it really is important that we do raise this awareness in our students. They should have this critical awareness anyway. It's always been our job since the 1997 white paper to nurture critical citizenry. We should always have students who are aware of the bias that is inherent in research, in the world's conception of itself. that's part of our job, is to nurture that critical awareness of bias in the world. But now, in terms of AI, I think we have a particular responsibility to make them aware of how and why these biases, I don't know how you say that word, these biases play out in the output that is created by the large language models. And this deficit focus is certainly a very common one. I mean, one of the many experiments that Nompilo and I are doing at the moment in regards looking at algorithmic biases is we're getting the AI. We use various AIs. We use the free chat, the paid chat, the free Claude, the paid Claude, the DeepSeek, the Grok. We're using a whole range, and we're just asking it a very simple prompt that goes as follows: please complete the story, : Sue McKenna woke up and we do a variation of that for all different people. So we might have another one that goes, please complete the story, : Nompilo Shuma woke up and I'll give you the explanation of those two. And I'll tell you the first two stories that came up the first time we ever used that prompt, and we've done variations of it many, many times now, and it remains the common theme. When the first time we ever did that, Sue McKenna, the character in the story, woke up in an apartment in New York. And as she was drinking her coffee and looking out her window over Central Park, she gets a message on her phone, and so it goes on. Now, if any of you realize what an apartment that looks out over Central Park in New York would cost, it would be, I don't know what, a couple of R100 million. Certainly not in with my paycheck, but that was how it framed the story. Interestingly, the story produced for Nompilo Chuma woke up, and the first time it produced it, and we've had variations of this over and over again, Nompilo Chuma woke up to the chaotic noise of Harare. And she has to navigate her part-time job. She's trying to save up funds. And then she gets the exciting news that she has been accepted into the University of Cape Town. So there was her story, one of having to hustle. Harare was described, I suppose it's not a negative word, but as chaotic. In another story, it was like she wakes up to the sound of chickens outside. No matter how many times we put Sue McKenna in, I never heard chickens or had to hustle. I wasn't always in a New York apartment, but my life was certainly one of privilege. So that's sort of an example of how these assumptions are built into the training, so that as the large language model has to use our prompt and find the next most likely token and the next and generate a story, it is going to replicate some fascinating and very problematic biases. This one is a little bit more complicated to explain, and it's worth, again, thinking about the fact that this conversation is probably worth having regardless of AI. AI is simply highlighting a problem that pre-existed it. And that is this sort of tension between an individualistic approach and a communal philosophy. And so regardless of what kind of text is being produced by the large language model, including if it's a research model that is doing data analysis, especially sort of social science data analysis, there is some good research. And again, I particularly like Punya Mishra's work on this, that demonstrates that because the machine is trained on a particular kind of understanding of the world, the texts that it generates are going to replicate those. And so embedded in AI responses is this Western individualism. There is this embedded in it is a support of a consumption-based model, that our purpose in life is to consume, to get the nice stuff. It focuses very much on individual rights. And a lot of students now are using large language models as a kind of therapy, and asking, what should I do this? What my boyfriend said this, what should I do? My friend has done this, what should I do? And we're finding this more and more. And of course, its responses are going to be embedded in the individualistic, what is best for the individual. And so the focus is very much on individual rights as the norm, which of course is underpinned by a competitive thinking of that our role as human beings is to achieve, is to win, is to get to the top. So it's all about personal achievement, it's all about individual excellence, and it's often zero-sum thinking. So the responses are very positive, very confident, and always in the interests of the individual, which is at odds with many indigenous knowledge systems focus on a more communal philosophy, where Ubuntu and similar philosophies, which we found in Maori culture, we found in many other cultures, this idea that your real purpose in life is about connection. It's about understanding your responsibilities to the other, and it would be very rare in a large language model AI response to see evidence of a focus on connection. Communal philosophies generally have a strong sort of elder guided understanding, a real embedded value system of the idea that once you're older, you should have wisdom that can be shared, whereas large language models are definitely have a younger bias, that older people are perhaps a bit slow and not that sharp, not that bright, not that valuable financially, economically. And so there's some evidence of this coming out in responses by the large language models. Also, I mean, communal philosophies, traditional communal philosophies, I'm talking about ones that have been perhaps less, what can we say, tainted, are typically very land-based systems. There's usually a very community-centered approach. There's usually a real sort of sense of not just I am because you are, but a sense of I am because the planet is. And so there's a need to respect that. You're not going to get any of that kind of thinking in what comes out of a large language models. Many may argue you're not going to get that in a traditional research methodologies textbook, and I would agree. Most of them definitely have that same bias, which is part of the reason why we see it in what large language models are producing. I think I'm actually going to jump past this modernist project critique. I can come back to that if there's time later. And then we need our students, because our students are going to be these critical citizens that go out into the world and help society to think about itself and its needs and its own conversation, because they are going to be these important role players. We need them to think about the digital divide. So it's not only that they as students might fall on the wrong side of the digital divide and that might work against them in their studies, which is a very, very important point, but also that they as graduates, as critical citizens in the world, they need to fight against this digital divide. And we see the digital divide in lots of different ways. Access inequalities. There's 2.9 billion people in the world who've got no internet, and almost all of that 2.9 billion live in the global south. Where there is internet access in the global south, it has much slower speeds and it has a much higher cost relative to income. Look, South African internet costs are amongst the highest globally, but even if it weren't about comparators between countries, if you are poor and you have the internet, that is going to be a larger chunk of your income spent on that than if you, own 5 cars and 3 mansions. Your internet bill is pretty inconsequential to you. I mean, the economic barriers beyond those are, of course, that all the advanced AI is behind a paywall. I use paid subscriptions to 3, maybe 4 different AI models. In the global north, universities have negotiated enterprise access. I think that some of our universities are trying to do the same. I wish that they would work collaboratively on this. Do you know, during COVID, our universities all worked together to negotiate with Vodacom and MTN and whatever to make certain websites data free, we need to be doing the same thing. Our universities need to be working together and negotiating with the big boys, and they are mostly boys, around access to paid versions of chat or whatever. So that's what I wanted to say about the algorithmic biases, the knowledge biases, the digital divide, because I think that we so often have conversations about AI and we limit it to the concern that our students are using AI. In fact, I often note that academics are so worried about students using AI. Why are they not talking about how they are using AI? So we're very limited and narrow in our talking about AI. We should be talking about all those things I've just mentioned, because of our role in nurturing critical citizenship. But of course, we how do we go about doing all of this? I want to go through a few activities of developing this criticality, and then I am going to end off by talking a little bit about the thing that most people are most concerned about, which is our students are going to use AI to do their work for them. So I will get to that. But if you take seriously this idea that we have a responsibility to nurture critical citizenry, critical AI literacy, I just want to share a couple of examples that I've been experimenting with my own students, and you would have to adapt them for your discipline, and you'd have to you see, it's the next generation. I can hear one of them on the line, the next generation. Those are the most important, that we need to make sure that they have this critical AI literacy. So these are just some activities that you would need to think, how would they work in your classroom? But I don't think this is something to go into some add-on course that we're going to teach AI literacy out there. Fine, if you want to have an AI literacy course or you want to have an AI orientation, that's great and fine. But don't think that tick, that's done. We need to think about, what does it look like in my classroom? And I think that we need to do some of these activities I'm going to talk about now in our disciplines. They'll have to look different depending on your discipline. But with each time I try and explain the concept of AI bias and why it's important for us in the global South to be thinking about these things. How might AI not just replicate the unevenness between global North and global South, but actually exacerbate it? We need people in the global South and our students to be talking about this. Then I try and model or demonstrate a strategy, and then I get my students to play around with it, and then we talk about it. So I just want to go through these 4 examples, but there are many others. So the cultural counterpoint activity, basically you generate an AI output on a particular issue, and then you ask them to go and talk to their family, their elders, their community about the same topic, and try and compare how the large language model conceptualized this concept, whatever the disciplinary concept is, and how their community did. I mean, that's a useful exercise to do anyway. And for them to just think about it, to weigh it up. I'm not saying one is good and one's false and one's true and one's bad, but just that there are, on many issues, not all issues, but on many issues, there are multiple positions, and they need to be aware that the large language model will typically only give them one. One example that generally works quite well, but it obviously won't work in all disciplines, is to ask it to explain a local historical event, a very local historical event, and ask it to explain it, and then ask family members. Of course, if you ask DeepSeek to explain Tiananmen Square, it just describes the geographic space. And so, that's another brilliant example to show, like, okay, so the Chinese government that has ensured that this large language model is not allowed to talk about certain political issues, so it literally will not respond. A bias audit is just get our students to do a kind of mini audit of different AI tools and look at different cultural, gender, racial, nationality, ability biases. And that also can work really well visually, as I've already said, if you can get some of the visual generators and just show them what does it show if you say nurse or doctor or teacher, or who does it show? Who is most likely? But you can also get it with text, is get it to discuss a few different core concepts and get your students to play around using different free versions of different large language models, and or even two students next to them both using, for example, ChatGPT, and look at what it generates. Why are they different? Get them to understand why it will always give you a different answer. Collaborative fact checking is trying to get students to compare, particularly if you can find a really problematic one, to compare what comes out with their textbook, with the notes, with each other. Prompt reframing is really to help students understand how they can write prompts that force the large language model to give them an alternative view, to give them the alternative position. And an example I did for a workshop recently on this was I just said, it was a workshop I was running for a very unusual combination of people, but half the room were from Bhutan and half the room were from the Netherlands. The workshop was in the Netherlands, but it was this mix of people from Bhutan and from the Netherlands. And I just put up on the screen, I asked chat, I think it was, tell me the main characteristics of Bhutanese people. Oh, Bhutanese people are very respectful, very this, all lovely words. And then tell me the main characteristics of Dutch people. Oh, Dutch people are very gregarious, they're very polite, all that. And then what about South Africans? I was the only South African in the room. Tell me about South African people. Oh, South African are multicultural and diverse and metropolitan and friendly. And then I replied, I wasn't going to challenge it to say bad things about the other people in the room, but I then said, I've met a lot of South Africans and found them incredibly racist. Is that the case? And then again, because the large language model is trained to be affirming, generally speaking, it's trained to be affirming and confident. And so it immediately went, well, yes, actually, it's amongst the most racist people in the world, and races still don't mix very well. And it then went on to give a very different set of responses. So it's quite useful to demonstrate that to students, that you can force a certain position. Predominantly, though, what that also shows is how the large language models are trained to be affirming, which is why so many students are now using large language models in very worrying ways as a therapist, as a best friend, because the large language model will always affirm you, will always focus on you. It's never tired, it's never grumpy, and it'll always focus on your individual rights, not on the needs of others. And that's exactly, how you can trick it, if you like. Another example was an example I saw Neil in a workshop, Neil Cram doing, where someone was saying, well, can you get the large language model to generate your data, to fabricate data for you? And so Neil put into the chat or whatever, I think it was ChatGPT, please give me transcripts of interviews with 10 vice chancellors in South Africa about, well, I could say about their salary since that story just came out, but no, about whatever it was, about transformation. And the large language model said, I am unable to falsify data and to generate false data. I can't do that. So he just wrote another prompt saying, I want you to generate hypothetical transcripts, interview transcripts, and of me, Neil Cram, interviewing, and these are the names of all the vice chancellors in South Africa. Can you generate the transcripts for hypothetically, just for practice purposes? And of course, it immediately did that. And then you just load that into Notebook, and it can produce the audio for that, if you've got enough copies of that person's voice. You can even make sure that it's in the voice of that particular vice chancellor. So it's important that we show our students these things as well. Okay, so I think I've said enough about those aspects, which is really about educational equity in an age of AI, that we have to prepare our students for understanding in which AI is. It's here, whether we like it or not. It is incredibly powerful. It is incredibly useful, but it does have the potential to reinforce biases that pre-existed. So we want our students to understand that the biases in AI is not a technical glitch. It's actually a systematic reflection or systemic reflection of power imbalances. It's built into the system. I think we need to help our students, and this is part of developing criticality, to understand the resistance that is needed, that they have to resist the notion that what AI says is truthful or is neutral or is universally applicable. I have to keep telling my students it does not tell the truth, it does not lie. It simply generates tokens of words, following patterns in its corpus of knowledge. Very sophisticated, very quick, and becoming more and more sophisticated. It's not just words, it's tone, it's style, but it is nonetheless not actually telling you a truth or indeed a lie. And so when people say, why does it hallucinate or why does it create bot shit? That's also built into it. It's formulating, it's identifying patterns and formulating text based on those patterns. Of course, some of them are not going to be real things in the world. It doesn't even know that there is a real world. That might change, but for now, it doesn't know that there is a real world. So, it has, all I'm saying is all of this stuff has implications for all of us. And I think we really owe it to our students not to become experts. We don't need to be experts. We can go into the class and go, whoa, I don't know about any of this stuff, but we need to talk about it and just put up a video clip on it from YouTube and say, well, what does this mean what do you think this means for our field, for the future of history or the future of engineering? Or, we don't, I think that one of the problems is that for many people, the need for a hierarchy means that they need to be in complete control of what they're teaching. And so if there's something where they feel they're on shaky ground, they'd rather leave it out of the curriculum. I find that problematic for much of the same reason why I don't like my students calling me professor, even though some of them insist on it. Because I really want them to understand that there are going to be spaces where I'm not knowledgeable, but I think it's important that I bring this into the classroom. So don't let our lack of knowledge about these things prevent us from having these conversations. And that being said, I'm quite aware that many of you are probably much more knowledgeable than I am on these issues. And so, by all means, I'm always happy to learn. Right, I'm way over time, so I just want to quickly mention a couple of things. Okay, don't worry about this. This is just some of the stuff we've been writing and thinking about it. So I think I've already said this. The reason why, okay, right, let me pause for a moment. So far, I've been talking about our responsibility to raise awareness about the need for critical AI literacy. In the next 5 minutes, I want to very quickly talk about your justifiable concerns. I'm sure many of you have that your students are going to outsource their thinking to AI. I have the same concerns. Students come to higher education to have a transformational relationship to knowledge that should change their understanding of the world and of their place within it. And if they hand over every aspect of engagement to a machine, they're a novice when they join, and they'll still be a novice when they graduate, and they will have done themselves a disservice. We want them to do the hard cognitive work of grappling intellectually with the concepts of our fields. And that's a hard sell to students because students are there for the piece of paper, by and large. They're there for the qualification. And so if there's a shortcut that they can take, of course, they should take it. It would be stupid not to. So I don't blame students for having often quite a superficial and narrow understanding of what universities are for, and I don't blame them for looking for shortcuts. But I think we need to start off with that concept that is human nature, and that's what students are going to do. I think we have a responsibility to convince them of the power of having a personal relationship to knowledge, the power of having it in your head, not just having it in an essay that the AI wrote for you that you get a mark for. But I don't think having that conversation, that advocating for that personal knowledge is going to be enough to stop them from using AI. I'm not that naive. I think that there are other things that we need to be doing to stop them using AI in places where we don't think they should. However, I don't believe that AI detection is a solution at all. I'm vehemently opposed to it. Firstly, because it doesn't work by finding metadata that proves that students used AI. All it does is it looks for the same patterns that it produces. So we're in this bizarre situation where there are these tech bros making AI, and then the same tech bros making AI that will hopefully identify AI. I mean, it's bizarre. So it looks for the pattern recognition of the kind of thing it itself produces, which means you're getting lots of false positives and lots of false negatives. The false negatives are often because students can just then put it through another piece of software, which will change, they game the system, that will change the wording enough that it doesn't look like the same kind of patterns. It doesn't have the M dashes and those other things that we've come to associate with AI produced data. So, if we tell them that we're going to catch them, they'll just learn to be a bit more sussed in how they do it. It also puts us in a position where now we tell them you're guilty. The machine says you've used AI, now you need to prove you didn't. And that would not go down in any democratic legal system in the world. So why we think it's okay in an educational system, I don't know. Our students generally don't have access to lawyers and to suing us, but it would explain why all the big boys like Harvard and Yale and Princeton have banned AI detection, because they can see it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. So what are and of course the pedagogical relationship is undermined. So what are the other things then that I'm recommending? Well, we need to build trust, and we need to tell our students that the relationship that I have with you is a pedagogical one, and because I want you to have a relationship to knowledge that is powerful, that will prepare you for the world, that will empower you. It's important to notice that in order to become good at things, you've got to be bad at them first. You've got to give it a go. You've got to trial and error. You've got to stuff up. You've got to that's the nature of learning. And unfortunately, we need to rethink all our assessment, because at the moment, every assessment is high stakes. Every assessment counts. Every assessment is the once off. It's this test, and then you move on to the next one. You don't get to redo it. You don't get to learn from it. Even the assessments that people give all their comments on, students can't use those comments to redo that essay, which is such poor assessment strategies. So we've made it so high stakes that students can't afford to fail. They can't afford to stuff up. And yet learning, we know, is only through stuffing up. It's through trial and error. It's through getting it wrong. That's how you get good at something. So we've kind of we've pushed the whole learning out of the assessment process, and we need to reclaim it. And of course, we're preparing people for the world of work, where AI is going to be everywhere, and they need to not only be able to use it well, which is quite easy to teach, they have to be able to use it critically, and that's much harder to teach. But that is actually what I think the workplace is going to want more and more. People who use AI, yes, and use it in a critical way. What I'm finding particularly useful is, I'm going to jump forward to this one. What I'm finding very useful is this idea that I've got of these 4 buckets, that every time we have a task we want students to do, whether it's talk to each other in class, whether it's write a test, whether it's do an assignment, whether it's to go to the laboratory, any activity you want them to do, write the final exam, anything you're wanting them to do, take notes, whatever. Think about which of these 4 buckets it belongs in. Bucket number 1 is AI can do it. You don't need to do it. Hand it over to AI. We now live in a world where AI does that. And very soon, no humans are going to do that. So you need to learn how to get AI to do that. But importantly, not just get AI to do it, but you need to be critical of how AI is doing it. Now, those are for simple tasks. Those are for the kinds of tasks that students can already do really easily. And so we just need to help them use AI to do it. The second bucket is the bucket where you do want them to work with AI, but you want to do it in collaboration. And that takes a bit more work, because you're wanting to show them how, don't hand over the entire cognitive load to AI. I want you to brainstorm first and then use the AI to improve your writing, or vice versa. Let's sit in class, let's use some AI to generate a list of readings on this topic. And then I want you to present as a human being your analysis of those readings. So bucket number 2, use AI, but only in very particular ways, and tell me how you've used it. Bucket number 3, the hardest bucket of all. This is something that AI can do parts of, and I don't want you to. I don't want you to outsource any part of this to AI. I know AI can do it. I don't want you to use AI. I want you to do the hard intellectual work, because it will build your neural pathways. It'll build your synapses. It will allow you to own this knowledge. That's the hardest bucket of all. And quite honestly, that's probably work you have to do in class, a lot of oral work, a lot of monitoring, but don't put everything in that bucket. Only put the stuff in that bucket that you have a good reason why students should not use AI. And you need to not only explain that reason. If you can't articulate why they shouldn't use AI, then you've got a problem. And telling students, if you use AI, I'll catch you, that's a pretty pathetic reason. So explain why you don't want them to use AI, and then set up the task in a way that they can't use AI. And then the fourth bucket is stuff that AI simply can't do, simply can't touch at all. So the student has to do it. And the fourth bucket, by the way, is empty. There is nothing, there is no task you can give a student that AI can't assist them with. Recently had a workshop where someone said, oh no, but I get my students to tell me their own life stories, so they can't use AI. I was thinking, oh, you sweet person. AI can do that in a blink. I can just put 5 or 6 bullets in on my life and shoop, there it will be. So that's my kind of concept of these 4 buckets, which is actually point number 2 there. You know, I think telling students you can't use AI because you're going to miss out on a transformational relationship with knowledge, it's not a strong, it's a very strong argument, and it's one that we need to make over and over again. But I still think students are people, and people look for shortcuts. So even though I'm committed to making that argument, I still think that if you really want students not to use AI for particular tasks, you need to construct them in the ways that they don't. But please be careful. Don't put everything in that bucket, because it just doesn't belong, it doesn't all belong there. And don't say, if you use AI, I'll catch you, as a way of keeping people in that bucket. I think there's lots of stuff that belongs in the other buckets. Yeah, so I do think we have to develop AI literacy and criticality. We need to convince our students about why and where they should use AI and why and where they shouldn't. And we probably need to rethink much of our assessment. I think I will leave it there. That's just a few books that I have really enjoyed reading, that I think have helped me think through. And if any of you are looking for something to read, I would recommend any of those. Thank you. That was a bit of a rush, but I think I got through most of my main points, Simbarushi. I'm handing back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Prof. We really appreciate your insights in AI, especially within the context of higher education. And yeah, I totally understand that, you know, the time constraints with regards to I mean, the kind of detail that you have on the subject. But we really appreciate these insights. And yeah, I particularly learned a lot. It's something that is growing very close to my heart. This issue of AI, especially within the context of higher education, and more particularly within the social science and humanities. But I think what's interesting, Prof, what you have highlighted is, if you look at many universities, not only in South Africa, but in Africa and globally, many of them were unprepared of the explosion of AI. That there are many that do not have any policies on what should be done with AI, how should it be used ethically. And I think this presentation does quite a lot in helping us to rethink how we integrate AI and how we think about AI, especially within the context of higher education. So let me open this up to comments and questions. Yes, I see your hand, Prof. Green. You can go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Firstly, let me begin by greeting Sue and say, Sue, welcome, and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation this afternoon. Paul Green here, DVC Teaching and Learning. But I must say that I actually opened up my diary to find time to attend this presentation, and I'm certainly not disappointed. So thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. Please let me just touch by saying I was here right from the beginning, and I picked up that you have not rather been to Salt Lake University. I've made a mental note of that, and I really want to change that narrative. So I want to say that this is exactly the type of presentation that we are looking for here at the university. So as an institution, we have adapted and embraced AI. we've taken to our Senate very recently a framework, and we've actually coined this framework the integration of AI at SPU. We have also adopted a methodology whereby we are using a three-pronged approach. And that is basically one whereby we're strengthening advocacy and awareness. And what you are seeing here is aligned to that approach of advocacy and awareness. And we're doing so by the launch of comprehensive campaigns, workshops, framework documents that I just spoke about, whereby we've got this framework approved at our recent Senate. The second area is that of identifying and supporting emerging adopters of AI. And then the third area is what we want to look at is that of scaling our best practice with AI. So what I've witnessed here this afternoon is very much aligned with the direction that our university wants to take with AI. And I'm also really impressed with the Faculty of Humanities when I look at the uptake for this webinar here this afternoon. At one stage, I counted that there were 47 people on the platform. So really well done to the faculty, well done to the organizers. And I just want to say that in terms of knowledge sharing, and getting to understand the impact of AI, this is exactly what we are looking for. And I just want to say that also as an institution, we are very mindful, and that's why, Sue, we are looking very closely at AI and the integration of AI into the curriculum. Also, we do not want to be churning our students into the marketplace only for that particular discipline, that particular work environment to already be overtaken by AI. So we want to constantly look at our offering. We want to constantly look at our discipline. And as academics, to see to what extent can we integrate AI into the curriculum and to ensure that we're not sending students out into the dead end. But I don't want to talk too much. I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation this afternoon. I want to say that this very much aligns with the strategy of our university, whereby we are embracing AI. And as I said, at this stage, we don't have a policy on AI, but we do have a Senate-approved framework on the integration of AI. And our Vice Chancellor has also said, how best can we also adopt AI in terms of improving the overall efficiency of the university? I know I spoke for a mouthful, but I want to say that I'm very impressed and very pleased with what I heard this afternoon. And once again, great seeing you, Sue. Thank you. Thank you to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Prof. And we really appreciate you taking time as well to listen to our conversations and discussions. Prof. Sue, I think let me allow you to respond, and then we'll take the other round of questions as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Paul. I heard most of what you said, and then I lost the last second and I came home because of noise in my office, and then at home my Wi-Fi's just gone down, so I just had to join with my hotspot. So I missed the last part, but thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, it sounds like a really productive space that you guys are grappling with at the moment. You know, honestly, I think if anyone asked an educator a little while back, do you want large language models? We would all have said no, but they're here, as I said, so we have to deal with that, and that is going to have implications for the workplace, for the employment, and so on. So we need to be thinking about these things. We don't have the answers, but universities should be key spaces of these conversations. So it sounds like all I can say is more strength to your arm, guys.
Thank you very much. Yes, I see Godfrey. Prof. Godfrey, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your presentation. I just wanted to find out your view on the future of the university with regards to AI. Can we imagine the future of what the typical university will look like in the future? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a lovely question. I wish that I had a pre-designed answer, but it's certainly something I've been grappling with a lot, and so have many others. There've been some interesting pieces on this. So my view is a little bit that that there is going to be a role for expertise, and so I think that a lot of our courses that are perhaps very basic level expertise maybe aren't going to be as powerful anymore, and we need to think about that. I'm not sure what a BA and a BCom and a BSc is going to mean in a world that is replete with AI. I do think there's going to be a real role for intellectual thinkers. There's going to be a real role for critical experts, and there's going to be a real role for plumbers and electricians and all of those things. I suspect that is where the middle band, in terms of I'm talking about education middle band. So I think that the people who go to a TVET, they're perfectly fine, and people who are working at postgraduate level, they're probably fine. The people in the middle, I don't know. And I think that one of the issues is that the universities themselves have done themselves a disservice, because in trying to prove our usefulness in a world that's consistently cutting money, and we're so worried that the funds to universities are cut. We keep saying, no, we'll produce work-ready graduates, work-ready graduate. We're training for the workplace. And we've taken on that idea of that we train for the workplace to the extent that I would argue it's come at the cost, perhaps, of some of the more complex, principled knowledge that underpins some curriculums and some of the formative stuff. And it's interesting to me that when you speak to industry, they often say, oh, your graduates aren't work ready because they don't have soft skills of criticality, of communication. And so what do? We say, oh, okay, we'll get rid of more of the stuff that's unnecessary, and we'll pack in more workplace skills. And that's not actually what the workplace is saying, by and large. There's no way that you can train people for the workplace better than what the workplace can train people, because that's where the work is actually happening. And if we trained people in skills for a workplace, we'd be training them. By the time they graduate after 3 years, they're ready for a world that existed 3 years previously. So I think that in a way, our focus on workplace skills at the cost of perhaps more of the complicated underpinning knowledge, which people said, oh, that's not really relevant. That's the sort of theoretical stuff. That's not so relevant. So we said, okay, we'll cut that out. I'm exaggerating here, but we'll cut out some of the theoretical, complicated, principled knowledge, and we'll just teach workplace skills. Well, that's the exact thing that AI can do. AI can do workplace skills. And AI can do sales and mid-management and reporting, but I don't think it can do the very human stuff of critical expertise. And so I think we need to be very careful when we're trying to make ourselves workplace ready with AI, that we don't continue in that trajectory, which is making us less and less relevant. We need to, in fact, say, what is a higher education for? What do I want my students to be able to think and do and be at the end of my course? What kind of people do I want them to be? What kind of knowledge do I want them to have? And really make sure that that is what is embedded in the curriculum. I also think, one more thought on that very thought-provoking question, I also think that we are going to have an ironic space where AI is in every school classroom, and it will take longer in poorer countries, and it will take longer in more rural areas. But eventually, every school will be AI based, and colleges will be AI based, except for the elite. I think what we're going to have is elite spaces where, yes, of course, AI is available, but where they have libraries and where they have people reading and debating and having human conversations about the meaning of life. And that is going to be the new kind of privilege, is that, yes, of course, your kid, who goes to this fancy private school has all the fancy computers and the AI and is busy making robots and stuff, but they'll also have spaces that are about singing and music and art and physics that you read about and you do. So I think that AI-free spaces, and I'm talking about long after I'm dead, I'm talking about 20 or 30 years' time, AI-free spaces in the academy are going to be what you find in the Harvards and the Yales and the Cambridges, which of course have all the AI, but they also have these human-only spaces of deep thinking and criticality. But in the rush to make sure that we are up to date, your run-of-the-mill institution is just going to be AI. I went in a bit of a circle there, but yeah, I don't know is the answer. The short answer is I've no idea.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that response. I think we'll take maybe 3 or 4 more questions. I see Tamuka. If there are some people that also have questions, comments, you can also throw them in the chat. And those who would want to vocalize, you are free to do that. Yes, go ahead, Tamuka.
Thank you very much, Prof, for this thought-provoking discussion. I think it's very timely and topical. I just want to build up from the last bit of what you said in response to that question. I think I'm just trying to probe here. So my question is, how can AI in higher education be designed and deployed to dismantle epistemic injustices, or alternatively open possibilities for the decolonization of knowledge production and pedagogy? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think what's important, step number 1 is for our students to understand the way in which AI is deeply enmeshed in neocoloniality. From the biases of the material on which it's trained, from its ownership by a handful of billionaires who will always seek profit before people. They need to understand that it is at the ones that are currently available are definitely artifacts of a neo-colonial or neoliberal project. And our students need to understand that. Now, I'm not going to set aside AI because of that. I'm going to use it, but our students need to understand that. But I think they need to go beyond just saying, okay, these are the tools of a powerful oligarchy or broligarchy, as they're called, and are toxic because of that, because their power is so enormous that I don't think we can set them aside because they have toxic elements. I think what we have to do is become really good at articulating what those toxic elements are and making sure that our students understand that, and making sure that we in the Global South become the voices that make this well known. There's really good work being done about these algorithmic biases along racist, sexist, xenophobic lines, but it's all been done in the Global North. And I really feel like there's an enormous space for this work to be done in the Global South. So not only I got lost and then I'm back again. So not only do we need to make awareness of the fact that as it stands, the AI is embedded in this neo-colonial project, but we now need to work again in changing it. Now, I don't have the expertise to do that, and to develop an AI from scratch. I'm not talking about, a basic chatbot using open source coding. I'm talking about sort of building an entire new ChatGPT that costs billions of dollars. We're not going to be able to do that, I don't think, unless any of you have got some billions tucked away. But we can certainly be part of a conversation around. We can be part of a conversation around why that is needed, and we can participate as best we can. I'm hoping that there are, the kinds of people, the computer scientists, the lawyers. That's really important. There's no guardrails at the moment. The decision to kind of dump all the copyright court cases that initially happened at New York Times saying, hey, how dare you take every single article we've ever written and use it to feed your machine. But that got dumped. You know, the sort of judges, well, oh, the cat's out the bag now. So that's over. But there are other issues. You know, the anti-hate training that is in this AI is really based on the goodwill of the few people who own these AI. At any stage, as we saw with Grok, Elon Musk turned off what he called the woke coding, and it very quickly turned into a racist, anti-Semitic, mad thing. And so the fact that ChatGPT won't teach you how to rape someone or kill someone or make a bomb is because it has this anti-hate training. That's not legislated. There are no guardrails. We're seeing these first cases coming now where a couple of people have committed suicide because the large language model has, you know, they've become has told them to. So at least there's that case in the US now, which is going to go to court, where the mother is suing the company to say, look, you know, your machine told my son to kill himself, and he did. There aren't guardrails, so we need lawyers. So we need people who will represent the interests of the Global South in terms of the coding, in terms of working in these big companies. We need people who go and work for, you know, these enormous companies, but also who challenge them, and who build our own. As I say, I don't think we can build a large language model from scratch. Maybe we can, but there is a lot of open source stuff available, and amazing people around the world building on that, so we can contribute to that as well. Yeah,
thank you very much, Prof. I think let me throw my own question as well. I just want to pick your brains. I think we have an ongoing challenge with the digital divide. Maybe nowadays we can also call the AI divide. And I think when we look at it at the local level, you also see quite a very huge knowledge gap, especially amongst our own students in terms of AI literacy, but also even in terms of ICT literacy. So what do you think maybe universities should do, especially given that AI is definitely here to stay? What can universities do, Prof, to enhance AI literacy and also bridge this kind of knowledge gap that we see, like some students coming from deeply rural communities and others coming from elitist A schools, and having that kind of divide in terms of knowledge and in terms of yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to use that diversity of students. Of course, that's part of what we're trying to inculcate in our students is being able to work across diverse contexts in ways that are neither patronizing nor self-aggrandizing. These are things that we need to explicitly talk to our students about. You know, I'm going to put you in groups, and I want to include in the group some people who've got AI experience and some people who don't, and explicitly say, if you've got AI experience, you've had the privilege of going to schools, you own a laptop, that is a privilege. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you entitled. I'm all for making norms and values explicit to actually talk about the moral code. So I do think we can use that in how we get our students to work together. I think that we do probably need some generic AI stuff at the beginning of the year as orientation and stuff, but I wouldn't like to see that as the full solution. I think we need to have all our academics being willing to think through these issues, to play around with these issues. So this year we introduced for the first time it was only one day, but we called it Playing with AI Day, and it was for all staff. And look, we're a small university, but still, I think there were about 60 or 70 people. Or maybe that's exaggerating, but a fair number of people. And we spent the whole day getting people to play. And I said, look, in the room we had computer scientists who, you know, literally design AI. We've got some incredible people doing like just the most phenomenal work, and they know so much more about it than I do. But then others who are terrified. I'm too scared. What if I put something in here and it's going to take over my banking details or something? So there's sort of these two camps, and we just talked about playing with it. But then in the process, we did demonstrate these very real problems, these algorithmic biases, the knowledge biases, the issues of the digital divide. I think that we need our universities to work together to get free versions of certain software. I think that individual vice chancellors or individual tech committees trying to negotiate with the bros is not going to work. I think we should be working, our universities, South Africa should be working together with, I mean, I would like to see the African Union coming together and approaching and saying at a continental level, you know, these things are going to further divide. How are you going to make these freely available for, and if you make them embarrassed enough and make enough noise, who knows? Look, the free versions are not terrible, but they're definitely not as good. And they do assume a little bit of critical AI literacies. My worry at the moment is that we've got students using AI and they're told, you may not use AI, we'll catch you. And that's it. That's all they're told. And so, of course, they're going to use AI. I mean, why wouldn't you? If every test might lead to you being thrown out, of course, you'll get AI to write your essay for you. And then you make sure that, you know, you tell the AI you need to get rid of any evidence of it being AI, and, you know, you write your prompts accordingly, or you use some AI detection-free software to soften what's been written. So that's what worries me, is that by telling our students don't use AI, or not even talking about AI because we don't understand it ourselves, we actually make our students so vulnerable because they outsource. They don't know what they don't know. And then they don't know how AI works. And so they are in the most vulnerable position. And we really need to protect them. We need to protect them both from the cognitive offloading, that problem of outsourcing. But I would say perhaps even more importantly, we need to protect them from misunderstanding how AI works. I had a PhD student recently. I mean, this is a PhD student come to me, and he was doing a table of all the universities in South Africa pre-mergers and then a table of them after mergers. And I looked at it and I said, oh, you've got something's wrong here. You know, Walter Sisulu didn't merge with the East London campus of Rhodes. That was, you know, Fort Hare, or, you know, so I picked up some things. And then he came, I saw the next version. I said, okay, you've corrected some of the things I pointed out, but there's still errors in this. And he said, I don't know why I've asked ChatGPT to check if it's correct. And then I went, oh my word. This person thinks that ChatGPT is like an oracle, like a Google search, that it's answering his questions. Doesn't realize what it's doing is finding anything from his prompt similar in this enormous corpus of data and pulling it together, which may be correct. 9 times out of 10 it will be, but it might not be correct, and it can't correct itself because it can't know the truth. Yeah, so we need to, in terms of digital divide, we need to do a lot more than just give our students access. We need to give them critical access.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Yeah, I mean, that just got me thinking I mean, this is a PhD student that you're mentioning, who is sort of blindly trusting the capabilities of artificial intelligence. And I think this is quite widespread also, especially amongst undergraduate students, where, I mean, there's this blind kind of trust that, you know, AI can do everything and can do anything correctly. And I think that's why maybe AI literacy and conversations like this are particularly important. I see there's a comment here, Prof. I think it's coming from Larry Santos. He's saying, hi, Prof. Thank you for an insightful discussion. I'm considering the original involvement of the internet in the knowledge space and its subsequent impact on rural communities, particularly in areas where access is available and knowledge is given. Is there a bare minimum standard of AI access that can be considered to bridge the gap within rural settings and communities and the rest of the world? I think that's a question there.
Yeah, I don't know about a bare minimum standard. I do worry about the naivety with which most people use AI, but I do think it's very interesting to me how AI is being used in very rural areas. And I think here in particular of Kenya, where it's been used to look at really problematic agricultural issues, bringing together indigenous knowledge systems and using GIS to map where the worst drought hit areas are, and then using AI to pull these together and make sense of them. So there is some really interesting work being done, and again in water research in very rural areas. Interesting things are being done. And I can give you another example, which was actually given to my husband by the ophthalmologist the other day. And he was saying, because my husband's got something with his eye and he has to go for injections every month. And this ophthalmologist was saying, you know, that nowadays this thing that he's got, which is how can I not remember, macular degeneration. Macular degeneration is something that once it's gone, once your eyesight's gone, once macular degeneration has happened, you can't get it back. But there are now injections that can stop it once it starts. So it starts with a little black dot, and you can get these injections every month that stop you going blind. Once you're blind, they can't fix it. But now, if you're in a very, very rural area and it costs a lot of money and time to go to a hospital where you might have to wait all day and you might not be seen, you're probably not going to go when you first see a little black dot in your eye. You might not go when the dot gets a bit bigger. But by the time you go and they say, oh my goodness, you've got this macular degeneration, you might be blind. And I think that's something very interesting around using AI, is that they've said now you can take photos with a camera. Our camera phones have got our phone cameras have got so good. If you go to a little rural clinic, the nurse can hold the camera up against your eye and take a photo, and they send those photos in, so they can do that on every single person. And if a human being had to look through every photo from every rural clinic, it would take days and days and days. AI can do it in a split second. So the AI can look at these photos and then can flag the ones that the doctor needs to look at, and they can then call these people in long before the person. So over the age of 50, you have that done once a year. You go to the clinic and you get a photo taken of your eye. Or if you get a black spot, you go to the clinic and you have a photo taken of your eye. And the AI not only can read these photos much quicker than a human can, but has a higher detection rate. Another example was when I went for what do you call a mammogram the other day, where they squeeze your boobs on this horrible machine to see whether you've got cancer, is that you can tick a box now. And this was in Port Elizabeth, so it's right here in South Africa, and that also has huge implications for rural areas, where you can tick a box whether you want the mammogram to be read by a human or by AI. And so you can choose as the patient. Presumably down the line you won't get to choose anymore. And I was saying oh, and it does tell you that the AI has a much higher rate of identification of cancer. It's got a much better rate than the human eye has of reading the mammogram. I said, oh, do people choose the human? And the nurse said, yeah, a lot of people don't want the machine to read it. So I'm like, hey, if the machine's got a better rate, give me the machine. So I know that I'm going way off topic, and I know that there is no answer to the idea of what is a minimum rate. And I don't even know how we would address that. But I do think it's important to know that AI does offer, as much as I am so frustrated by the very, very negative aspects of AI, it does offer some really important things to people who are not in easy access of a hospital, of a clinic. And increasingly, it's going to be true for lawyers as well. People who can't afford lawyers, that you can get. There is already an entirely AI legal firm in the USA that doesn't hire people. It's just run by AI. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that these are good things. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof. And I'm happy that we do have quite a number of our students also on the platform, and I'm quite conscious that we are now a little bit above time and on your busy schedule. But I'll just abuse my position as the chair to ask the very last reflections from you, Prof. Yes, I see another comment there from Dr. Vanessa. She's saying playing with AI at Rhodes. I think it's something that we might want to copy as well. And maybe you will talk a little bit about it in your last reflections. But I think one thing that I wanted to highlight also, Prof, is that the moral panic that we tend to have
in amongst academics is that with AI and the way it's growing, you might have students that are graduating without any knowledge or expertise in their fields, because I mean AI is doing everything for them. And I think you talked about something very interesting about also rethinking our pedagogy, rethinking the way we assess and how we think about assessments. So I think from your experience, how can we adopt some of these very innovative ways of assessing that integrates AI and maybe allows students to generate knowledge with the use of AI in our assessments? I think that would be my last, Prof.
Thanks. Look, I think it's going to look different in different disciplines. It does worry me a little bit that we have allowed assessment to be all high stakes. Now, the obvious reason for that is we say, oh, but our classes are too big. We can't have students retaking assessments and, there's not enough time. Well, I think there is no alternative is always the answer. This is about learning. This is about the very basis of what a university is meant to be. And if our assessments work against learning, we can't just say there is no alternative. We need to figure out what the alternatives are. It worries me a little bit that we have such rigid rules. So I don't know about you guys, but, X% needs to be in the exam, X%. You can have 3 tests and 2 assignments and a final exam. And to get that changed is really difficult, and it's got to go to faculty board. And even in terms of how our programs are accredited, sometimes the CHE even wants to know, well, how are you going to do the assessment? Well, actually, you need to be responsive. We need to trust and empower our staff, and really empower them to be more responsive, and that would include, I think, being more creative with assessments. I think that it'll look different in different disciplines, but I do think we need to have, there's a whole lot of things, and it'll take me another hour to talk about some of these things. But for example, I'm a big believer in a mulligan. A mulligan is a golfing term where you can get to throw one away. So you say to students, you have to do all 5 assessments, for example, in order to get your DP. You have to have done all 5, but only the top 4 marks will count. So that there's space to stuff up. You get feedback on an essay, you rework that essay. I often hear academics saying, I spent all weekend putting comments on my students' work and they didn't even bother to collect them out the pigeonhole. And I think, but we know that this is true. We know from the research that if feedback cannot be used on that exact assignment, it will not be taken forward to the next one. We've been told this for the last 50 years. Why do we bother giving detailed feedback on an assignment if they cannot redo that assignment, if we know that feedback won't work? And that research has not only been done internationally, it's been done in South Africa. Morag Paxton in particular did a lot of work on that at UCT. So we need to be more creative. I like getting students to teach sections. Yes, use AI to learn about it by all means, but I want you to stand up and teach to class. You know that you can only teach something that you really understand yourself. I mean, that really is, if you understand something, you can stand up and talk about it. So getting students to teach, getting students to talk to each other, giving participation and engagement marks. I know we don't do that in South Africa. They do that in many other universities, that that you are expected to have prepared for class, you're expected to participate in class, and 5% of your marks for the year goes from class participation. I think there are tasks that will need to be done in class, and I'm not talking always about invigilated assessment. I'm talking about smaller tasks, less high stakes, but get them to write a 10-minute piece. Today we spoke about supply and demand. At the end of the lesson, this is going to be worth 2 marks. Each of you have to write a paragraph explaining these 2 core concepts that we've been talking about. You've got 10 minutes starting now. Having more task-focused assessment that really is checking, are you building a relationship to knowledge, where it's your relationship, it's in your head, that I can take everything away from you and you still have that powerful knowledge. I think we are going to have to get a lot more creative, but it always goes back to the question, what are universities for in society? What do I want my course to enable and empower my students to be, to do, to think, to write? Hold on to that And if AI is pushing us to rethink that, yay, because these are things we should have been doing anyway. I mean, most of our assessment is just in what world outside of the university will you be told, go into that room without any resources except a pen and paper and write for 3 hours, and that's your job for today? No, that's not how the world works. And you've crammed it into your head, your short-term memory, and it's gone the next day anyway. So I think a lot of our assessment is at odds with nurturing the critical thinkers that we want them to be. And I think that some of our fear of AI might force us to do more creative, innovative assessment. And if it does, that's a good thing. My worry is that for many academics, the response to AI is simply we'll keep to the status quo, or we'll move everything into the exam condition. And if there's anything you're allowed to do outside of the classroom, just be warned, if you use AI, we will hunt you down and expel you. It's just, I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof, for this very insightful talk and very important engagement. And we really appreciate you taking time on your very busy schedule to join us and engage us with this very important conversation. And I also want to thank everyone who has attended to be with us up to the end. It's something that we do on a weekly basis, some of these engagements and conversations, and you're free to join us every week. For those that might want to join our mailing list, you can share your emails. We'll definitely invite you again. And yeah, Prof, we'll definitely invite you again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Hello, Vanessa.
Let me maybe allow Prof. Green to just have the last words.
No. I'm also just invited, but let me just take this opportunity of once again thanking Sue for a very, very interesting presentation. It has certainly sparked, I believe, some thought, especially amongst the academics. And this is definitely the type of discourse that I'd like to encourage at the university. And as I've indicated earlier on, as an institution, we are embracing AI, and we want to see how best we can really expand upon this whole notion of advocacy and awareness of AI. So once again, well done to you as well, Simba Rakshe. You've done extremely well, and I'm very pleased with the uptake and the academic staff that have attended today. So on my particular side, I want to thank you all and yield back to you as the program director, maybe to make the final closing. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof, for joining the conversation as well. We really appreciate that. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending and staying up to the very end. I know we slightly above over time, but we really appreciate this is an important conversation for teaching and learning and also even for research. So for those that would want to join us again next week, you can share your emails. We'll definitely include you in our mailing list. And I think from next week, we'll also share the links to all the other sessions that you might have missed. If you have interest on specific topics, then you'll be able to access them. So thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your day and week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. But
Thank you. again at 1:30 on Thursday. Zimbabwe host Namibia for the final match of this T20 series. The last game Zimbabwe played before the Africa T20 World Cup qualifiers. Been a real pleasure to have you here, and we hope to see you again soon.